Thank you all for gathering together today to share remembrances of Arthur and celebrate his life and legacy. I'm Rosemary Shahan. Arthur was the love of my life, and we became partners in the adventure of life. First, I want to thank everyone for the outpouring of sympathy and love since Arthur died. I appreciate your thoughts and kindness more than I can say. I especially want to thank each of today's speakers and everyone who has written in remembrance of Arthur and shared your memories of him, which are now posted on the website at arthurblaustein.com. You're invited to visit the website and read what others have written and share remembrances of your own. And they will be up there for a long time and warm my heart and the hearts of others who knew and loved Arthur. I wish we could all be together in person, especially since there was a technical glitch getting things started, and there was difficulty hearing the music. But as you know, Arthur was bi-coastal and has family and dear friends on both sides of the continent. So I'm grateful we can get together, albeit over Zoom. And I want to thank my IT friend, Steve, who's here with me in case there are any other problems. He's rescued me many times when there were glitches. And I also want to give a special shout out to Arthur's wonderful caregivers who helped me care for him at home. We could not have done it without you. I first met Arthur about 20 years ago at a bookstore in the Bay Area promoting a book published by MoveOn.org called 50 Ways to Love Your Country. Both of us submitted essays that were selected, and we met while reading excerpts from our essays. Arthur caught my eye right away. Not only was he dashingly handsome, but he exuded the most wonderful, positive energy and integrity. He was brilliant, but also amazingly down to earth and treated everyone with genuine interest and respect. Unless, of course, you were a diehard Republican, and then he was likely to ignore you completely. Or if you were a Republican politician, he was going to outwit you in ways that you probably wouldn't even know it had happened. It wasn't until sometime later that we began to date after meeting again at a party thrown by a mutual friend. He had the most marvelous, witty sense of humor, and no matter how dire things were in the outside world, he could always make me laugh. I loved his stories, and I loved hearing about those of you who are his friends, and he held you dearly in his hearts. Luckily for me, he liked my cooking, and I delighted in cooking him his favorite dishes. We shared bedrock values, and everywhere we went in Berkeley, it was like going around with a celebrity. He was greeted with great affection by former students, colleagues, other authors, writers, neighbors, owners of family restaurants, and friends. I think it borders on the miraculous how much Arthur managed to achieve for the benefit of humanity, especially when you consider that for decades he did it all without the benefit of email, cell phones, computers, and for a long time, even without fax machines. And he did what he did for its own sake, not for recognition or accolades, but because it mattered and it was the right thing to do. I'd like to briefly share with you just a few things about Arthur that weren't in his obituary or part of his public life. Like when Arthur was supposed to be studying for his bar mitzvah, he spent much of the time playing poker with his Hebrew tutor and winning. The very first paying job that Arthur had when he was 15 was digging ditches and excavating land for the skating rink in Central Park. He became a proud member of the Building, Concrete, Excavating, and Common Laborers Union. For the rest of his life, he never crossed a picket line. When Arthur's beloved Giants baseball team left New York and moved to San Francisco, Arthur was crushed. He felt it was an unforgivable betrayal. He went to the outfield where Willie Mays used to play, scooped up some dirt and took it home, and stopped watching the team for years until a friend who had season tickets prevailed on him to go watch a game with him, and Arthur caught the baseball bug again. You've probably seen the photo of Arthur marching for voting rights in Selma. There's more to that story. Arthur went to Alabama without telling his parents. That photo appeared in newspapers all over the country. His parents opened up their newspaper one morning, and there was their son, who they thought was safely ensconced in grad school at Columbia, marching in Alabama. Also, while he was in grad school, he was editing the War Peace Report and working to end the war in Vietnam. And he opened up a cafe in New York called the Right Bank, where local luminaries came to hang out, and he struck up friendships with folks like Gloria Steinem. He later said Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays he worked to end the war. Tuesdays and Thursdays he studied, and weekends he ran the cafe. Arthur often said he was a creature of habit. He swam outdoors a mile a day, every day, without fail, for decades, in all kinds of weather. He taught at UC Berkeley for decades without missing a single class, and he loved teaching. He ate lunch at the same family-owned Vietnamese restaurant near the Claremont for decades, and they always served him the same meal. The more I came to know Arthur, the more deeply I fell in love with him. Years ago, we decided to get engaged, and he gave me a beautiful and distinctive ring that I'm wearing now, that he bought when he was visiting a Navajo reservation, and it fit perfectly. We decided not to set a date to get married, mostly because we were so happy with our relationship the way it was. And also, let's face it, we weren't under a lot of pressure to get married and produce grandchildren. But we wanted to let close friends and family know we were committed to each other and share in our happiness. I miss Arthur like crazy. But I'm doing my best to focus on honoring his life and legacy. And I'm being grateful for the enormous blessing of having in my life for so long. Although with someone like Arthur, it's never long enough. Getting to know Arthur's friends and family has also been a huge blessing for which I am forever grateful. Next, we'll go to Jim and Melissa Bloom.
Hi, I'm Jim Bloom, and I'll tell a story also different from probably many of the others. I'm Arthur's cousin, and I've always known Arthur as Cousin Arthur and have known him my whole life, but got to know him very well when I came to Berkeley in 1970. But one of the great things about Arthur is what happened before I actually came to Berkeley to go to school. I was a senior at Scarsdale High School in the late winter of 1970, and I was on my college tour, and I had applied to Cal and a few other schools, another one, Reed up in Portland, and 3 on the East Coast and the Midwest. And I'd gotten into Berkeley early, which was great and very exciting. And I took a trip and I went to LA where my brother John was, and he was a student at Antioch College, and he was on a work study program in Los Angeles working during the winter semester. And I flew out to Portland to go to Reed that I had applied to and didn't get in, and all probably for the better, because when I got to Portland, it rained for 36 hours. And I went, well, this is not the place for me. And the next stop was LA, which I went to. And that weekend on a Friday night, my brother John and I and another young man from Antioch drove to Berkeley, and we left LA at about about 8 in the night, and we arrived in Berkeley at 3 in the morning. And we were staying with somebody who I knew from back east who was living in the Bowles dormitory, which is sort of like the Ferry Castle across from Memorial Stadium, for those of you who know Berkeley. And I ran up these massive steps to tell the fellow that we were there, and left my brother and his friend down in the car. And on my way back down to the car,
3 o'clock in the morning.
yeah, 3 in the morning, 3 o'clock Saturday morning. And as I was coming down the steps, I noticed a police car, lights flashing behind my brother's car. And as I further descended the steps, 2 more cars pulled up, just like in a TV show. And as I got to the bottom of the steps, they had taken my brother out of the car and he was spread-eagled against the wall. And I went down and said, "You can't do that. That's my brother." And they threw me against the wall. And as it turned out, at midnight that night, the UC police had just been empowered to arrest people. And we were their first arrests ever. And they thought they arrested us for grand larceny and possible drug dealing, neither of which were true. And they took us down to the UC Berkeley Police Department at the bottom of Sproul Hall. And they, as I like to say, they did the good cop, bad cop routine on us. And we had to give them people who could vouch for us, because I was an underage 17-year-old and my brother and his friend were 19 years old. And you know, what was a kid from Scarsdale staying in LA doing in Berkeley at 3 in the morning? And the other two were, what were 2 kids who go to school in Ohio, living in LA, doing in Berkeley in a rented car? And after a while, we said, well, call Arthur, which is what we did. And Arthur got on the phone with the police and he managed to explain to them that we were good kids from back east and out on a trip. And he managed to convince them of this fact so that we didn't get booked, just arrested. And a few minutes after that phone call, they let us go. And the next day, Arthur took the 3 of us in his convertible, which he always drove around Berkeley. He always had a convertible for all the years that I knew him. The first one was this beautiful beige Mustang. And then after that, he had this green Volkswagen Rabbit that he always drove around top down, all times of year, whenever the sun was out. And he took us up to Tilden, and he took us to that beautiful green lawn in front of the Brazilian Room. And it was one of those spectacular kind of Magritte sky, blue weather, green everywhere in the hills of Berkeley, Saturday afternoons. And it was on that day, despite the adventure from the night before, that I fell in love with Berkeley and moved in 1970 and never left. And during all of that time, Arthur and I were always very close at family functions. We'd always see each other around town. We would have dinner. And he, you know, very, very close. What I forgot to say early on is that the relationship was that my maternal grandmother had a sister named Esther, who was Arthur's mother. And so that was our relationship together. And although I didn't know this until Rosemary told me recently, was that when Arthur was growing up, he and my dad all shared a house in the Bronx together. And that Arthur's dad, Morris, was very, very friendly with my grandfather, Frank, who unfortunately I did not know well because he died in 54 when I was age 2. But it was, you know, because of Arthur probably that I wound up in Berkeley and never left. I mean, we did 5 years ago. We're living out in West Marin at the moment, but stayed in Berkeley for 50 years and had a wonderful time. And, you know, it was a great, great memory. And I have to tell you that Arthur's mother, Esther, who was my grandmother's Bella's sister, was an absolutely beautiful, beautiful, elegant woman, as was my grandmother. And Rosemary and I used to joke that Arthur got a lot of his good looks from Esther. And his dad, Morris, was also, as I hear, a wonderful, wonderful man, very warm, very loving, very funny, very smart, a real intellect. And, you know, probably a great guy, though I have no memories of meeting him. So I just want to say a quick word, just say how wonderful Rosemary is and has been and was during Arthur's final months. And, you know, just love you, Rosemary. Just great. And I'm going to let my wife, Melissa, speak, who has other memories of Arthur as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa. And of course, I met Arthur through Jim, but Arthur and I had our own relationship apart from that because we shared two passions, swimming and reading. And I saw Arthur all the time at the Claremont at the pool, you know, his office, otherwise known as Arthur's office. And he always had newspapers and books. I remember talking with Arthur about Toni Morrison's Beloved and the deep impact that it had on his students. And I remember when she won the Nobel Prize, and we were so happy. And he turned me on to May Sarton. I remember her great book, Kinds of Love. And he turned me on to John Nichols. And, you know, at first I felt really insecure having a discussion with a college professor about literature. But he never made me feel intellectually inferior, you know, despite the fact that I was. But I think that's, you know, what made him a good teacher. A great teacher was his generosity of spirit, you know, when it came to sharing ideas and sharing ideals. What an idealistic man. And again, I should totally, you know, I always respected him when it came to politics. He was my informant, and again, never talking down. He was just plain interesting and positive. I mean, it's so inspiring to see a positive, smiling activist, you know, so important. I wish I'd spent more time with him. You know, he kind of made me into a better person, and the world needs more Arthurs. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jim and Melissa, and love to you both. And next we'll hear from Jeff Bowe.
Thanks, Rosemary, and thanks for giving us this occasion to experience Arthur again through our memories. I met Arthur almost 60 years ago when he walked into my office in Washington, where I was running a program for the war on poverty. And he said he wanted to help. We hit it off right away, but I really had no idea where he could fit into what we were doing. But it didn't matter because Arthur had an idea. And for the next few months, practically every other meeting I went to with a community group or a group of activists or bureaucrats, Arthur was at the meeting. So inevitably, we got together and formed a political partnership and a friendship that's lasted ever since, despite the fact that I kept living in the East. We wrote a book together critiquing Richard Nixon's domestic policies. He got Jimmy Carter, you saw in the photo there, to appoint me to a national commission on poverty. We worked together in an effort to create a progressive book group, a book club, which didn't turn out. And we worked on George McGovern's campaign in 1970s, and actually many, many other episodes and projects. And through it all, I mean, I developed a very profound respect for Arthur's lifelong dedication to social justice and the importance of inspiring the next generation, which I think was a major, major contribution that he gave to our cause. One thing that bound us was a certain New York style of humor. I don't think we ever had a conversation without, at some point, one of us laughing at something. And that was that went on for 60 years. I remember shortly after the 1960 election, Arthur called me to say that Reagan was going to, not surprisingly, eliminate our anti-poverty council. But he said, don't turn in your government ID because you can still use it to get a discount on Amtrak. So I've always thought of it after that as the Arthur Blaustein official government discount that I got. But eventually, a gap grew between the picture on the photo and my face, which got older and older. And so I became too embarrassed to use it. Later, I asked him, I said, Arthur, you still don't use this, do you? And he sort of laughed enigmatically. And I thought the message was, I've got more chutzpah than you do. And he was right. He also had a sharp idea and a sharp eye for the phony. During the McGovern campaign, I remember him skewering an Italian guy from Brooklyn who was trying to pass himself off as a Mexican-American leader. The WASPs who were running the McGovern campaign accepted that, but Arthur knew his guys from Brooklyn. We also shared a serious interest in political literature, although I could never keep up with the reading list he sent me. And I've thought many times how great it would have been for me to attend his class. Despite the setbacks, Arthur never stopped being a champion for life, for the life-affirming social progress against the forces of death that perpetuate poverty and injustice and oppression. So I'd like to conclude with a part of a poem that was written by Edna St. Vincent Millay in 1934, when the clouds of fascism were gathering over Europe. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I hear him leading his horse out of the stall. I hear the clatter on the barn floor. He is in haste. He has many calls to make this morning. But I will not hold the bridle while he clinches the girth, and he may mount by himself. I will not give him a leg up. Though he flick my shoulders with his whip, I will not tell him which way the fox ran. I will not tell him where the black boy hides in the swamp. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I am not on his payroll. Arthur Blaustein was never on death's payroll. He was a warrior for life, and he never surrendered. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. I know he loved you dearly. And next we'll hear from Stan Schumann.
Thank you, Rosemary, and for asking me to say a few words in the memory of Arthur, a great friend and a remarkable person. We met in East Hampton over 50 years ago, where I had a summer home where Arthur would come for a few weeks to beachcomb, swim, and most of all, to pitch in the Artist Writers softball game for the writers. There were three things that brought us together: a house with a swimming pool, my college baseball background, and a joint heightened interest and involvement in social justice, a fundamental driving force in Arthur's value structure. The ball game was a celebrity affair, drawing large crowds. President Clinton's been the umpire in the last few years, but with a surprising collection of actually quite good athletes on both sides. Arthur's nemesis for many years was Sam Cohen, the most important Hollywood agent, who annually pitched for the artists. Sam pretty much dictated who got to play. Although I pitched in college, Arthur drafted me to play third base for him. Since it was soft pitch, all the right-handed hitters could pull the ball, so it really was the hot corner. The money raised went to local charities. Competitive pressures sometimes flared, but all in all, it was a great event. Arthur loved it. And in addition to coming from Boston, I'm a lifelong Red Sox fan. And Arthur, as we've heard, was a diehard Giants fan. So professionally, I represented the Dodgers when they were sold, and Madison Square Garden, and the Knicks and the Rangers. So we had constant hot stove discussions. He stayed with me and my family, did his daily laps in the pool, and led active conversations on the politics and society needs of the day. He always gave us a sneak peek of his annual reading list, which was extraordinary. And of course, his own writing was prolific, with widely syndicated articles on social and political issues, the first anti-Nixon book, The Star-Spangled Hustle, and important books on the importance of democracy and the necessity for us all to get involved in the system. His book, To Make a Difference in Democracy is Not a Spectator Sport, was really ultimately encouraged the involvement of young people. And I actually bought many dozens of copies of it to distribute to various school groups because I was so impressed with it. And many years later, Richard Haas, then the CEO of the Council of Foreign Relations, wrote the Bill of Obligations, 10 Habits for Good Citizens, showing the continued importance of Arthur's prescience. And encouraged by both, I actually endorsed the program at CFR for sons and daughters to encourage their early introduction to civics and foreign policy. And during the days, Arthur would take a book and a chair to the beach. You probably saw him in the early pictures lying on a beach chair. It was a wonderful picture of Rosemary. And always return with the most interesting, attractive women, some very well known. Whatever his appeal or his pitch was, it was highly successful and helped expand our group of friends in the nicest of ways. With him in California and me in New York and traveling widely, we would have constant phone conversations on the state of our shared interest. President Clinton chose Arthur to be a member of the National Endowment for the Humanities. President Carter asked him to serve as chair of the National Advisory Council on Economic Opportunity. And he was the co-head of the National Law Center on Community Economic Development, about which he did superbly. He asked that I serve as chairman, which of course I did. I'd been a law school classmate of Ruth Bader, and I too had many service activities where we had overlapping interests, leading to really constant consultations. I was on the Emergency Financial Control Board of New York City, ushering the city through the financial crisis of the 70s and all the problems attendant with that, and the Downtown Development Corporation dealing with the aftermath of 9/11, and President Clinton's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, an extraordinary experience, particularly in light of today's concerns. And finally, our shared interests. You all know that Arthur, when he was at Bard, working on Adlai Stevenson's campaign, had the great fortune to drive Eleanor Roosevelt for the day. It was a real highlight for him. And in 1969 to 79, I was president of the Whitwick School, which is a large residential treatment center for disturbed young boys. The main campus in Austin was called the Eleanor Roosevelt campus, after her fundamental role in its establishment. So coupling all of this with Arthur's participation in VISTA and AmeriCorps and several marches, you can see that we had a constant dialogue over shared interests and genuine friendship. And finally, and perhaps most important, we were both blessed with long-term love affairs with extraordinary women. Rosemary and my recently deceased wife, Sydney, we both constantly talked of the good fortune of our lives together. And I had a professor who always said, I would rather have a grade A person with a grade B idea than a grade B person with a grade A idea. And for me, Arthur was always that grade A person. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. And I know Arthur loved you like a brother.
Me too.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Sarah Hobel.
Hi. First, I'd like to just start by thanking you, Rosemary, for bringing us all together, but perhaps more important for being, the last love of Arthur's life and for taking such wonderful care of him through his incredibly difficult journey to the end of his life. I'm a person who Arthur taught a lot of lessons to, a lot of lessons about life. I was fortunate to meet him when I was at the highly impressionable age of 12. Until then, I'd pretty much been focused on exploring nature and collecting a whole bunch of animals, which kind of annoyed my parents. And it was a somewhat unusual kid, privileged, and from Scarsdale. My father had been a furniture maker and my mother was a math and physics teacher. Both were born and raised in New York City, but now had settled in Scarsdale in the suburbs for the sake of the children. Shortly before this time, my father had sold his furniture business, and oddly, and to my surprise, he became a documentary filmmaker in partnership with the highly political Canadian journalist Douglas Leiderman. Their documentaries were dedicated to educating TV viewers about the tumultuous issues of the 60s, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, Cesar Chavez and the labor movement, the war on poverty, apartheid, Native American recognition and restitution. It was a view of the world that a 12-year-old was a little shocked to learn about through her father's work. As my dad's work engaged him with news, politics, and equity, of course, he met Arthur and started working with him. And Arthur introduced him to the world of thought leadership and activism. Together with their friend Sam Beard, they became movers and shakers in the Westchester County efforts to advance Bobby Kennedy's campaign for president. They spent many evenings, as I turned into an adolescent, talking, plotting, and planning at our home in both Scarsdale and in Vermont. My father, he was something of the elder statesman, and he was so delighted to host the young men, Arthur and Sam, and to be part of their efforts to make the world a better place, as was my mother. My father, now he was the domineering center of my universe. He taught me everything I needed to know beyond the classroom. Sam's, well, he was sort of unspeakably serious and quite standoffish, a little scary. But Arthur was magical. Arthur was handsome, dynamic, full of life, and charismatic. He not only spoke his mind, but me at 12 and 13 and 14 and 15, he invited me to engage with him. He was so comfortable in our home. To me, like a newfound uncle with special powers to explain the world, and most importantly, how everyone had a role in standing up for change. He introduced me to the idea of advocating for the underrepresented and the underprivileged people in our country. As a family, I would say we fell in love with Arthur, but who could blame us? My father, mother, brothers, and I all cherished the times he stayed with us. Long after I had moved out, my mother would call with excitement to let me know, Arthur is coming to visit the Hamptons. And a little side note, Stan, she was also very jealous when he often stayed longer with you. But I never missed joining him for a swim, a conversation, and to catch up on his endlessly interesting life, which you all echo here. Arthur, in my mind, was the father of American public service. He honored me when I was grown up by asking me to write about my experience with volunteerism and public service, which he had actually expired, for his book, Democracy is Not a Spectator Sport. I am so grateful now to have that book on my shelf, reminding me not only of Arthur's amazing values and his life's work, but also of the privilege I had to know him and for him to know me. I will think of him always. Thank you.
You, Sarah. I know he felt that your parents were like his second parents after his dad died when he was so young. Yeah. And next we'll hear from Joe, your brother Joe.
Hello. Can anyone see me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good.
And hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm Sarah's older brother by 2 years. I just want to mention something she said, that my parents were friends, dear friends, with Arthur for over 50 years. And one memory for me of their friendship really stands out. But I have to harken back to the Jimmy Carter days. I was getting an MBA at Columbia, and I needed a summer job. I just mentioned this to my parents in passing. I didn't think they could help me. And the next thing I knew, Arthur was calling, asking me if I would like to work for a consulting firm and could I move to Washington, D.C. ASAP. he assured me that it would be a real job and that I would be working directly with Black entrepreneurs. Arthur had gently enlisted my father into the anti-poverty movement, and I knew that Arthur was a man of action, but I never thought I'd be the beneficiary. I asked Arthur when the job interview would take place, assuming I wouldn't have a chance of getting the job, and he said matter-of-factly, "No need for an interview," and gave me a number to call to confirm my start date. The whole thing was surreal, but that was Arthur. If you were fortunate enough to be in his orbit, you were lucky indeed. It's indelibly marked in my mind. Arthur sitting with my parents on their lawn in East Hampton, my father wearing a huge floppy hat and lathered with sunscreen, and Arthur and my mother with no hats working on their tans. Arthur in a comfortable slouch that I now know after reading one of the remembrances is the same slouch he used teaching his classes at Berkeley. I know that if my parents were still alive, they would tell you that they not only loved Arthur, but looked up to him. That they were proud that their good friend pitched for the Riders softball team. That their friendship with Arthur was a long-standing source of joy. And that the sun is less bright now that he is gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I love those photos of Arthur with you, with your parents. And next we'll hear from Ken Hecht.
Hi, Rosemary. Thank you so much for this chance. Following the group of luminaries who have preceded me, there's not a whole lot left to say, except that, of course, they reflect on Arthur and different parts of Arthur that we all knew. I had told Rosemary early on I wasn't sure I would recognize him with his clothes on. We mostly spent time together in the locker room at the Claremont, and it was a joy. The swimming was good, and Arthur was great. And like all the rest of you, I got all my books that way. I got all my political information that way, and I got a lot of laughs that way. One thing I wanted to mention that I hadn't put in the blog was one day I told him that one of our children had settled in Brooklyn, and knowing that he was a New Yorker, I asked him whether he had ever been to Brooklyn, and he said, after a suitable pause, once. And that was the end of that conversation. And so I send my love to everybody. And Christina, who's sitting here with me, does as well. She didn't know him as well in the locker room, but she knew him pretty well everywhere else. Thanks a lot.
Rosemary, I just want to add that you're a wonderful speaker and you've made this such a nice get together for everybody. So thank you.
All the credit goes to the speakers. Thank you so much, Ken. And I know Arthur loved the swimming with you and hanging out in the locker room, and the Claremont was like his home away from home. And he actually took great pride in saying that he never showered in his own home in Berkeley. He was always showering at the Claremont. Next, we'll hear from Bernadette Del Chiaro.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. I want to point out, I think Deborah Robinson has joined. Hopefully you guys have seen that. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So my name is Bernadette Del Chiaro. I was a student of, to me, Professor Blaustein back in the early 1990s. And I've been a fan ever since, just like all of you. It's a real honor to be here with you today, Rosemary, and all of you. He had a major influence on my life and my decision to choose a life of public service through social change organizations. He reinforced that this path, this career path, was legitimate. And that's something that a lot of young people need as they choose their careers in life. He taught in a hall. I wrote on the website. He taught in a hall famous for Berkeley students called Worcester. It's concrete. It's sort of oppressive. It's not very beautiful compared to the architecture at the rest of the campus. Kind of dour and dark. And he brightened it up, just like many people have said today. Really made it a special place. You just sort of ignored the concrete and gray. The building is famous for kind of showing the construction of what it takes to hold up a building and run a building. And I think that's actually kind of emblematic of his teachings about democracy, that the building blocks of change are often sort of not glamorous. They're often just everyday, mundane things, but it's that hard work, that commitment, and that the basic ingredients of get down on the field and play ball. That's what it takes to have a healthy democracy. He also taught, classes such as community and economic development, which could be sort of heady ivory tower type classes, but he absolutely made them inclusive and accessible to everyone. And that was particularly important to me as a first generation college student, kind of working class girl from a small rural town. He broke down barriers and made everybody feel welcome and important. And he, as I mentioned in my blog, but it I think bears repeating, he physically embodied sort of inclusivity and equality and collaboration by just virtue of how he set up his classroom. He did not sit at the front, stand at the front and, in front of a whiteboard. It was like a concentric circles, and he would sit in the middle of everybody and would sort of slouch down, I think purposefully to sort of, I thought that's how I saw it. Now he probably slouched down, sounds like, but that it embodied this sense of we are all here together, and there's no one right answer, and it's a matter of listening and learning and sort of getting your hands dirty. So all of these things were just incredibly important. Also, as a professor, the syllabus was basically a bunch of good literature and followed by class discussion. One of my favorite books is The Dogs of March. If you haven't read that, if you didn't make that round on his, I saw that, Rosemary, it's on the website. But it's a particularly good book among the many that he encouraged us all to read. I'm sad that Arthur is no longer roaming this earth with us, making change and inspiring others to make change. But I know I'm here to represent literally thousands. I was trying to do the calculations, Rosemary, I don't know if anybody did, but at least probably 6,000 to 10,000 students that went through his class over those 30 plus years. That taught us, and whether we chose a direct, exact life of social change work or not, I know his teachings have stuck with us and influence all of us today. So again, really good to be here with all of you. Honored to be able to speak and represent the many students that Arthur Blaustein touched through the years. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Bernadette. And I know he loved teaching. He just really enjoyed it, and he did not want to have teaching assistants teaching his classes, and he really enjoyed the interactions with the students, and you in particular. He was happy to have you back and spoke so highly of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we will hear from Sabrina Bornstein.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's a privilege to get to speak to Arthur's impact and to celebrate his life with you all. I've known Arthur as long as I can remember, so he probably would say since I was yay high. He's always been good friends with my mom, Lisa, who's also on the Zoom today. And growing up, as sort of many themes that have come up already today, but he was the fixture at the Claremont and an inspiration with his daily mile swims, and a guaranteed chance to catch up with him, to see his smile and to hear his infectious laugh every time I went. One of my favorite memories was when Arthur and I set up an email account for him. We went to the North Berkeley Library around 20 years ago, and I helped. He was incredibly excited about getting into the modern world and having an email account. And then for many years after, I had the privilege of receiving his emails and his links, mostly to his many articles that I'm sure many of us on this group received. And then I also loved visiting his house in North Berkeley and seeing the stacks and stacks of books. That really was his primary decorating style. And though over the years, he became much more than a family friend and became a mentor. Over this past week, I was looking at his emails and his articles. And again, similar to many here, it reminded me just how much he influenced the books I read as a teenager and into my 20s, and how they were all rooted in an understanding of history, culture, and social justice. When I went to college, I thought I was going to study neuroscience, but ended up studying urban studies, community organization, and community economic development. Undoubtedly, Arthur's influence had left its mark on my life and my career. The summer of my junior year, he set me up with an internship at the National Economic Development and Law Center. And then I proceeded to participate in AmeriCorps' VISTA program, advocating for affordable housing just after I graduated from college. And so ever since, my career has been rooted in social and economic justice. And I had the privilege of speaking to that path in his book. While I didn't have the opportunity to take his class at Cal, as many have said today, he was a generous teacher to us all. And I will forever be grateful for his influence, his mentorship, and his guidance in shaping my career in public service. And grateful for the important, I think, longstanding message that he imprinted on all of us, and many more, that democracy is not a spectator sport. So thank you so much for letting me speak today and inviting me to join.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And I know he was very proud of you and what you're doing with your life. And you mentioned that he had his way of decorating was books all over the place, right? Books overflowing from the bookshelves, books all over the floor. And I actually got him a T-shirt that said, "If it's books, it's not hoarding." Okay, and next we will hear from Deborah and Dennis. Deborah Robeson and Dennis Cohen.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, and thank you for inviting us here. And I'm sorry we were a little late. We saw the 4 o'clock, and so we didn't look more carefully, but now we're here and really happy to be here and happy to hear everything that everybody has said so far. I'm going to be the one speaking, but these thoughts are from both Dennis and me. We composed them together, thought about them together, loved Arthur together for so long. He was our friend, Arthur, our friend and neighbor for 41 years. And now when I look at the house, I see him as we saw him every day, walking out the door and going down the path and going out his gate and getting into his wonderful series of VW convertibles and driving off down Oxford Street towards the university or towards the Claremont pool, where he would sit and swim and sit in the sun all day and read and work and keep that incredible tan all year long. As he was getting into his car and we were out there, he would always stop and we would chat, and he would be carrying all these books and papers, things that he had just written, things that he was just sending into newspapers, and his lists of all kinds of things. And we were always happy that we were the recipients of everything that he worked on and that he made and that he created and that he gave to everybody. And we just felt like the lists of books that I don't know if anybody has talked about this, but the lists of books and for his progressive lists, that told his wonderful concepts of progressive education and progressive thought, and his real deep appreciation of writing and good writing and the authors that he loved. I know that you just talked about the piles of books, but to go into his house, his wonderful expansive living room with the comfortable couches and chairs everywhere, and see these piles of books that he would take us through. He would give us tours through these books that were coming out of the shelves and on the floor, as Rosemary said, and by tables on every single I'm sorry, on tables by every single chair and couch. And then he would show us the inscriptions inside. He was so proud and so happy about every one of those books. And he read every one of the hundreds of thousands of books that were in his house. He was inspirational. He was right there next door as our two children grew up. and our 4 grandchildren arrived, and he embraced them all, giving them advice and sharing his deep love of sports, particularly baseball, with all of us. When our son Stefan was 10 years old, Arthur took him to the A's game. Every year, the A's game would have explosions of fireworks towards the 4th of July. And he got seats for Stefan and himself in really, really good seats so that he could watch this game with this 10-year-old boy. And because the seats were so good and because Stefan was so attentive and so excited, he got to catch a ball that came into the stands. And Arthur's thrill was as strong as Stefan's was. And on the night before our daughter Elena's bat mitzvah, Arthur sat on the couch with her, and after she told him how worried she was that she would make a mistake with her Hebrew chants, Arthur put his arm around her and laughingly took away all of her worries and her concerns by telling her what his rabbi had said to him at his bar mitzvah, which was not to worry about anything because nobody was going to understand what she was saying anyway, so nobody would know that she was making any kind of mistakes at all. Arthur made her laugh and took away his concerns. And that was how I realized how he taught and how he taught people by respecting people's concerns and addressing those concerns with humor and affection. And he kept that humor and affection always. And to see him with Rosemary and to see the way you took care of him, Rosemary, with that same kind of respect and tenderness and love was wonderful for all of us to see. So we loved Arthur, all of us loved Arthur, and we miss his presence in that house next door every day.
Thank you, Deborah and Dennis. And I know he looked at the 2 of you like family. You were his extended family right there next door. And also he kept telling me that your the salmon dinners, you would take him, and the Italian food and everything, he just raved about that. And
Rosemary.
Yeah, you brightened his life in so many ways. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And next we'll hear from Judy McLean, who is like the co-trustee with me on Arthur's trust and a really dear and trusted friend.
Hello, everyone. I met Arthur when he was looking for someone to co-edit a book he was working on. At our first meeting, the subject quickly drifted to politics and books we'd both read and liked, and we actually forgot about that book he was working on. What followed was 39 years of friendship. We met for dinner several times a month, talking about life, politics, and literature. Arthur really knew how to be a friend, and he knew how to lend a friend the latest book he was excited about. We worked together. I edited many of the articles he wrote for newspapers and magazines and part of some of his books. Arthur helped me get work, recommending me to people who needed an editor or writer. Arthur co-founded the Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Literature with the author Barbara Kingsolver and literary agent Frances Golden, and I worked with them on the selection of finalists. Arthur and I volunteered together on presidential campaigns. We also supported each other through the ups and downs of each of our love lives. We commiserated as each of us got into and out of relationships that turned out to be not quite what we were each seeking. I have Arthur to thank for meeting my wife, Kathy. He introduced me to someone who introduced me to Kathy, and we've been together 28 years. And then Arthur met Rosemary, the love of his life. Rosemary founded and still runs today a nonprofit activist consumer organization, CARS, that fights for auto safety and fair pricing of cars. And she's a warm, generous, and smart woman. Arthur had some really great years with Rosemary when he was still healthy, and then some pretty great years when he was relatively healthy. The last 4 years of his life, as Parkinson's disease and other illnesses robbed Arthur of so much, Rosemary was the best caregiver I can imagine. She educated herself about the disease and made sure he had the best medical and physical care possible. She modified the house to meet his needs, She made sure he had the right food as his ability to swallow got weaker, and that he was as comfortable as he could be in a situation like Parkinson's where there's just a lot of discomfort. Thanks to her care and the stellar 24-hour attendance that she managed, Arthur never fell, which is really rare for someone with Parkinson's. Rosemary got up in the middle of the night when he needed her. Even as he lost more and more of his abilities, she made sure they did things together that he could still do, like watching videos and baseball games that brought in moments of joy and even laughter. And Rosemary did all this with grace, sweetness, and love. The last 6 months of his life, Arthur wanted visitors less often, but every time I did visit, the first thing he said when we were alone together was, "Rosemary has been wonderful." And when I was with the two of them, I could feel the deep love in that room. Arthur had a favorite saying that he often quoted, the words Adlai Stevenson said at the death of his friend Eleanor Roosevelt. She would rather light a candle than curse the darkness. Arthur was like that too. He may have felt like cursing the darkness, but he always, always lighted that candle. Thank you all for coming to celebrate Arthur's life. And now we'll end with 2 minutes of music and some final photos.